It's Joe, your faithful host and co-founder of Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. In case you missed our birthday, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this summer. That's a long time, especially in tech. That was before Marco, John, and Casey accidentally started a tech podcast. That was before Steve Jobs passed away and left Apple totally rudderless and foundering, never to release another successful product. Back then, we were talking about the brand new Mac Pro. No, not the new brand new Mac Pro, and no, not the one before that, but the one before that. For 10 years, we've been getting together each and every week to bring you epic tales of tech support and business management, and I'm pretty sure we've saved a lot of people a ton of time by sharing our struggles and solutions. We've also spent a ton of time on this show over the years. It takes a huge commitment to keep showing up every week. It takes effort, care, and attention to plan and outline shows, line up interview guests, coordinate our schedules, edit the recordings, post the show notes, and produce the special perks like t-shirts for our patrons. I'm not complaining. I really love doing this, and I'm proud of what we've created. I'm also really grateful for the support we've received from the Apple consulting community, like Adigy, for example. Not only does Adigy make the number one tool we rely on every day to manage our fleets of Macs and support our clients, but they've been a huge supporter of this podcast. We're also supported by Watchman Monitoring and Tidbits Content Network, two more great tools we use to run our businesses. A few dozen other patrons also pledged their monthly support, some of whom have pledged more than $1,000 over the years. Thank you so much. So, all told, how much money do we make on each show? Collectively, the community has spoken, and they've decided these shows are worth about $75 each. So, here's the announcement. We're showing up for our patrons. Starting now, we're shifting our focus to the Patreon community. That means the newest shows will be posted primarily on Patreon. How do you get the latest episodes? Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only episodes right in your favorite podcast app. If you already support us on Patreon, log in there to get your special link and subscribe to the patron-only show so you don't miss anything. For now, here on the public show, we're featuring a classic episode hand-selected for you from our catalog of over 500 episodes, along with the occasional new episode. And remember, we're regularly releasing new content on Patreon, where you can join our community of supporters starting at just $15 per month, giving you access to the freshest content. We feature dozens of exclusive shows on Patreon where we speak a little more freely about how we make business decisions, navigate client relationships, manage our employees, and sometimes deal with mistakes and difficulties too. Plus, as a patron, you receive access to our entire back catalog where you can revisit classic episodes and learn from colleagues we've interviewed who've shared their own best practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to pledge monthly on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your support, and we're confident your business will benefit from the wisdom of the community we've gathered there. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this classic episode of Command Control Power. Did you guys notice iMessage was down for some users last week?
For you?
For me, yeah.
That was your excuse for not responding to me?
Right. Wait, what did I miss? I'm sure I missed a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure you did, so it's easy to say.
He's going on vacation to visit his best friend. Just saying.
Well,
Whatever, Joe. Continue.
And I'm not sure when this show will actually go out in the feed, but this was the middle of March that this iMessage was down for me. So one night I noticed that a couple of text messages I had sent from my Mac had not actually gone out. And so I, clicked try again, nothing, no luck. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Quit, reopen, still can't send. All right, no problem. I'll sign out. This is what I would do for a client, right? Obviously, sign out of iMessage, sign back in. Should be fine. Yeah, I couldn't sign back in. Just unable to sign in. It would just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin, and it would never advance. Or eventually, I would get, it was like maybe after a 2-minute timeout or something like that, I would get a message that I'd unable to sign into iMessage. I tested my Apple ID, logging into to make sure I actually had the right password. I took my own advice there and signed into appleid.apple.com. And sure enough, I was able to sign in. So I knew I had the right password. But the first thing it did was it asked me for 3 security questions. And it said, you have to choose these questions before you can continue logging in. I had never added the security questions to my account, to this particular account that I was using. And I knew I had, and I just thought, whatever, I'll get around to it. So this time they forced me to choose, 3 security questions and answer them, to save them into my account, to then proceed, to log in. So I did that, and I thought, okay, obviously that was the problem. I figured, something got boosted with iMessage security, where maybe the Apple server is throwing back a message like, you have to prompt the user for security questions now, and iMessage is not able to do that or whatever. And so now it should work. Now I've got no problem signing in. No prompt for security questions. I can sign into iMessage. It continued not working. Could not sign into iMessage on my Mac. Troubleshooted it further. Tried a new user account on my Mac. Still couldn't sign in. So I thought, okay, it's not user level, but what could it be? I mean, what on the machine could possibly be stopping iMessage from working? I had another Mac where I was already signed into iMessage and it was working fine. I tested sending a message, no problem. So now I'm like really baffled. So I thought, all right, I'll just reinstall the OS. What have I got to lose? I'll rebuild the directory. I don't know. I'm just throwing everything at it.
Did you try defragging the hard drive?
No, I should have brought it.
I recommend that.
I should have brought it into you.
Please.
No, and so, spent about like 3 or 4 hours, like over the course of like that night and the next day, intermittently sort of troubleshooting this issue. Turn on the, we have this like status board that we sometimes use. That has an Apple system status little widget on it. And I turn that on and I happen to glance at it and I see a red dot on the Apple system status. I'm like, I didn't hear of any issues with Apple. So I go to Apple's main system status page, which is really comprehensive and really nicely laid out and stuff like that. And sure enough, it shows under iMessage and FaceTime that some users, and I'm thinking, yeah, me, were unable to log in to iMessage and they were working on the solution. So, the next day or whatever, they fixed it, or later that day, and sure enough, I'm able to sign in and iMessage is working. And after that, I thought, I heard something in the security, something in the news about Apple patching an iMessage security flaw. iMessage had been down for some users, and then Apple had patched a security flaw. I'm thinking, is there a correlation? Is the fact that iMessage was down for me in particular an indication that maybe my account had been suffering from this flaw, this security flaw?
Not answering your security questions.
Exactly. So that's exactly right. So I'm thinking maybe maybe if you had not answered those security questions, and I don't know, maybe that was the only issue, or maybe it's like certain users on certain servers or something like that were vulnerable to this particular iMessage security flaw. And to go further, and here's the paranoia creeping in, does that mean that it was exploited on my account? I don't know. Any thoughts on that, guys? Set my mind at ease here.
I think we've all seen that, where things have failed silently and you're sort of twisting in the wind at a customer site and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know why the hell this thing isn't logging back in. And you're trying to scramble, trying to think on your feet. But I think you hit the nail right on the head, Joe. I think there was a vulnerability for some users on some servers. Some server was exposed, and they just push out some reset globally to all these users, and you experience that.
It was my 1010 machine that wouldn't sign in, and I'm pretty sure the other machine that was working was 1011. So I'm thinking, maybe they blocked like anybody running certain OS versions, from connecting. Because, if there's a security vulnerability or something like that, usually there's like a combination of factors to exploit it. Like, maybe you use a 1010 Mac running this older iMessage protocol or something like that. And so maybe they blocked, specific machines. So anyway, it just occurred to me, like maybe that's an indication that something, maybe that helps us kind of like figure out the bounds of that particular flaw. Not that we'll ever get any, further information from Apple on it, but just a curiosity. But, it was, I felt like I was flailing, troubleshooting this. And I'm like, what would I do if this were a client? Like I would have
Exactly.
I don't know what I would do. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't my fault. It was Apple.
Yeah, I mean that's always the most difficult thing, because we're where the rubber meets the road. You're at the client site, and they're looking at you as the fount of all knowledge, and it's doing the same thing that it's doing for them when you're there. And those are always the most difficult situations.
Did you purposely go to the system status site to see if it was down? Or where was that in your thought process of troubleshooting this?
Yeah, it should have been much earlier in the process, I have to say.
No, I'm not judging, because I was going to say I make the same mistake. I could troubleshoot for like an hour and be like, oh, wait a second. Is this a bigger problem?
Exactly.
You
know? Doesn't make you a bad person.
Right. Well, right. Well, the thing is, it's like, it would have been such an easy thing to check, just to like pop into the site and check it. But it didn't occur to me because I knew I could text just fine from my iPhone, and then even another Mac, I tested and worked. So it never occurred to me that like the system was down, and it wasn't down. It was down for me on one machine, a little red dot on Apple's site saying, it's down for some users. So what actually made me go there and check that was not like just a bright idea to go look at it. It was that we've done some little upgrades here in the office, and I designed this little status board and put in this little Apple widget and this one is supposed to indicate the system status for like 3 different Apple services, like iCloud, iTunes and App Store or something like that. But in fact, I think there's like a little coding bug, and it only has one dot on it. It's either green or red. And so this dot just happened to turn red. And I looked at it and I thought, well, this, I didn't know anything at Apple was down. And I went to the full status page. That's where I saw that it was just iMessage and FaceTime that were down for just some users.
I was away last week teaching a class, and then I'm back in town this week, obviously. But I was thinking about the whole aspect of the running around, the everyday break fix and all that. And I know that this particular time of year, there are a lot of spring vacations and people might be away. But I've had a good couple of weeks of calm without being too worried. And what I mean by that is usually if it's quiet and calm, and we've all talked about this, it's like, what's wrong? Why aren't my clients calling? Why isn't there any panic and need for me or anything like that? Or why aren't I getting new calls? I'm starting to feel a little bit more at peace with that in a way, partially because the whole proactive MSP model is kicking in a little bit more. So I'm getting more to the point where I have more and more steady income on a monthly basis. And I'm also planning more and more visits when there are no problems at my clients, because they're already paying for the time. So we're planning a visit. We plan out our week and say, Matt, you go here, I'll go there, and we'll spend 2 hours or 4 hours at the client, do some FaceTime, maybe some minor updates, or just ask the employees some questions. But it's a less stressful environment because there aren't major issues. Of course, there are things that come up while we're there. But these last few weeks have been more about that. And it's starting to make me wonder, this MSP thing could really be working for me. It's taken so much time, as we discussed, to really push that through in each of our business models. And I think, at least for me, I think I'm starting to see that change in the business. Not to say there won't still be panic calls or problems or whatever, but I'm seeing more of an ease with my clients and seeing them more on a less stressful basis.
No, that's pretty awesome. That's the promise of managed services. And you're right, it has taken some effort. About how long have we been doing this show? About 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
We've all been, I feel like I've been working toward managed services since episode 1.
Right.
Yeah. So it's definitely nice to have finally arrived at like offering the service. And I definitely want to delve a little bit more into how it's working out on your side. I've just signed my second business client on managed services, just out of 2 sort of targeted, recommendations to business clients. They've both signed on. The second one after quite a bit of back and forth negotiations and so on. And we're just getting ready to begin to do a little bit of a targeted recommendation to some of our residential clients to kind of just fill in some of those gaps. Yeah, so it's just beginning now. Can you give us kind of like some general numbers of how many clients or how many users you've signed on?
Before you do that, Sam, just for clarity for me and for our listeners, when we talk about air quotes managed services, generally speaking, we're using some fine-tuned model, putting together something which includes grunt work and watchman and combined discounted hours. Roughly speaking, what kind of model is that?
That's exactly what it is for me. It's a combination of, watchman to start. That's kind of like a bare bones kind of thing. You definitely want that in all the machines. And then grunt work to manage all the machines as well. Updates and maintenance. And we charge for those two components in addition to what we call like our quick fixes or anything that's 20 minutes and under. So we include that for every user as well. And we have a per user price for those components. And then we include with that a discounted hourly rate based on a certain number of prepaid hours. Our minimum right now that we've been working with is 1 hour per month, but for businesses it's 2 hours and up.
For me, I'm trying to stick to a 4-hour minimum when I can, and that I have made exceptions, but I'm trying to make it so. Especially I have a couple of city clients. I'm like, I'm not going to the city for a measly 2 hours. The commute alone is that piece of it. So I'm trying to make where it's within reason a 4-hour minimum for my clients.
How does that speak to managed services though?
Yeah, you're saying 4 hours per month on the contract, Sam?
Yeah.
And the idea is you would maybe see them like once a month if they're on contract?
Yeah, well, generally we try and set up, and that's not the only time we're going to help them, of course, but that's the time we set up for a regular maintenance visit. And it could be nothing really big is needed at the time too, but we make sure that we have a little bit of FaceTime to just check in on people and see how things are going, and maybe go into the server room. And even though we can view it remotely or use Watchman or Gruntwork, we take a look personally and see what's up.
4 hours for any business client, is that the rule of thumb?
Generally, I mean, look, we have the mom and pop shops that are working out of their basement, and that might be too much for them. What I've found personally, and I'm still evolving it every single month. Like I've come up with some plans, I put them forward, and I got some bites, and my clients were like, yeah, this works for us. And then I decided, you know what, there are some things that don't work for me. Perhaps I should retool this a little bit, and not just pricing, but just how we work with the clients. So I still don't have, to this day, a set model. And I think that's just the level of maturity of my business developing the MSP model. I mean, we talked about Watchman, Gruntwork, and prepaid hours. And then there are some clients where they still want a contract, which is okay, but we still want to implement Watchman and Gruntwork. So we're doing a hybrid of those services on a monthly basis, but an annual contract with them, where it doesn't have to be per month, it's for the year.
I was just going to say, Sam, when you say contract, what you're saying is you're selling a block of time, right, for those clients?
That's correct, yes.
Right.
And I think that's an important differentiation to make. And it kind of harkens back to a previous episode where we were talking about, are we just a fix-it shop or are we specialists? And I think that, bring up the doctor analogy one last time, for a heart treatment, they don't both get the same recipe, or they both don't get the same treatment. And I think that that's true, Sam. I'm experiencing the same thing where two people are on managed service, but they've got a slightly different contract than the next guy, because it works for their organization.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what kind of a nightmare I'm bringing up for myself in terms of accounting. I mean, so far it's somewhat manageable, but as this grows more and more, I'm like, man, I get concerned about these different models that I'm starting to put forth. And maybe it's bad practice, I don't know, but I'm still learning the process, to be honest. What's going to work? Is there a one-size-fits-all? Are there changes I have to make? I learned that by talking to you guys, by listening to people we interview, and just by talking with my clients. All I can say is I'm still learning along the way.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I don't think there is. I think that people come in and they need a certain treatment or a certain type of service, and some like a more aggressive approach and some like a more conservative approach. So I don't think it is cookie cutter. I don't think one size fits all, and you have to be flexible enough to adapt your contracts to meet the client's needs.
When you're talking about these different, adjustments you're making and things like that, so Sam, are you adjusting like individual line items on a contract, or are you like working out what you consider like fundamentally different service plans for each client?
Not so much like a line item necessarily. It's more about the monthly, the contract, the monitoring services. So it might be a combination of those three things or one of those three things. We have clients that are just monitoring, that's it. They'll call us on a break-fix basis, but we're keeping an eye on things in case we see something that we can alert them to, which does work, in the home user environment. It's like, great. They're like, oh, I forgot you were looking at that, and I unplugged my time machine backup, a while ago. So those are great, but then there are ones that are, like I said, the combination of either contract and monitoring, or monthly and monitoring. But what I've been finding is the annual contract kind of works better for me in a way with certain clients, just because I'm not restricting a certain number of hours per month. Because just to give you guys a little bit of feedback, for me, what I used to do is I used to have contracts that said they were annual, and I didn't stick to them that well. And that was my fault. I just let things slide. I said, this is a small client. We've been working with them for a long time, so I'll just let it grow. That was such a big mistake because I'm just throwing money out the door by letting them take what should be a discounted rate for only a year and letting it fly for like 2.5 years.
Meaning until they finish out they use up the hours. So instead of saying, so you said basically it's not going to be, the hours don't roll over after December 31st. And instead you just said, screw it. And you just let them keep going.
Yeah, I was a mess with it. It's something I've said a few times, which is I was just bad on the financial side of being strict and saying you have to pay this and this is the amount. And if I raised my rates, I always felt very uncomfortable. But I sort of have a little bit of a buffer with that now because I have one person dedicated to the accounting process, and I can say, tell them their rate's gone up, and it's not me saying it.
Is that Nana?
Yeah, she does a great job. She picks up the phone, raises rates, and she's tough on the client.
She's very stern. Yeah.
It's just like you said, Jerry, it's an evolving process, and it's kind of cool to see it get to that point, though. I have to say, because one of the things we've also mentioned is I want to see that monthly MSP model hit a certain number that I know will cover payroll every month. We have fluctuations due to contracts and all this stuff, and we've talked about this, I'm sure, a bunch of times, but I'm starting to see that monthly number, that hard number, come closer and closer to that monthly salary. And when that hits, it'll be a golden moment because then I can have the other fluctuations, but I know I have my salary covered every month.
Yeah, that's a great position to get to. And I have the same goal in mind, just being able to cover those recurring monthly expenses on our side by recurring revenue on the other side. So that's the goal. And then everything else is gravy, if you look at it that way, all the break fix stuff and whatever else. I'd love to take a minute to thank our sponsor this week, Watchman Monitoring.
So Watchman Monitoring is a monitoring tool that you can not only install on your computer, but on all your client computers. So once you sign up, any client that you add to your Watchman account shows up in your control panel. Watchman will monitor server software. So it'll take a look at things like Daylight, Cario server, Lightspeed server. It'll make sure that those servers are working properly and backing up. It'll make sure that your time machine backups are working properly. It integrates seamlessly with products like Backblaze, CrashPlan, Carbon Copy Cloner. It will monitor I/O errors on disk drives. It'll take a look at RAID systems. It monitors network system performance, detects malware, and also can give you great reports on clients that you have on your network. So if your client is looking for inventory on all his machines and they want serial numbers and specs, Watchman can deliver that to you as well. It's invaluable, and we don't know how we run our businesses without it.
Watchman Monitoring is your main interface, with your clients for your managed services practice. It's a real cornerstone. It's true. It's a big aspect of that. And for a lot of people, I think it should be the first piece as you're building out your managed services offering. You almost can't do it without Watchman Monitoring. Before Watchman, I just remember having to corral all these disparate email alerts from all this various software. Carbon Copy Cloner is telling me that a backup failed, and Cario is telling me that a license expired, and you just have to figure out how to manage all that stuff. With Watchman, you just have one portal. You have one place where you can go in and you can say, I don't want to know about this again for 30 days. Don't bother me again for a little while on this issue. Or you can go through and you can just get a list of all of these little issues, either by client or by machine or whatever the case may be. So it's just such a great way to have a centralized dashboard where you can see just what's going on with all of your monitoring systems. It's just a fantastic piece of software. Highly recommended. WatchmanMonitoring.com/command control power. Thanks again to Watchman Monitoring for sponsoring Command Control Power. I found it kind of interesting to be in the throes of a negotiation around my second managed services contract that we wrote up. We originally made the pitch. In this case, they had a few dozen users. Basically, proactive support for those users was first line on the contract. Watchman, Gruntwork, and our quick fixes. That's all in. And then what was sort of subject to negotiation were the other items. So the monthly hours, clearly that's a big one. So we started them off. We looked through the last 18 to 24 months, figured out how many hours they needed on average per month. And it was something like around 4 hours per month. And that was without any special projects. So that was just status quo kind of maintenance stuff, which I thought was pretty low. I mean, for a few dozen users, 4 hours a month is pretty minimal to maintain that number of users on a regular basis. And then aside from that, they had certain projects that were pending, like upgrading everybody to the latest OS. That's a big one. I mean, they're due for that. Upgrading their server, implementing a backup server. upgrading Creative Cloud on all the machines and so on, just a bunch of little things that we know are pending. So we originally recommended 6 hours per month prepaid, part of our contract, at the discounted hourly rate. And we figured that would cover, everything that's been ongoing, like all the standard maintenance, plus these, few projects that we were planning for the year, and leave a little bit of room in there. So that was where we started the negotiations. We also charge separately an amount per server. So they have one Mac server in one location, and they have a backup server in a second location, and they're connected over VPN, and the main server is backing itself up offsite to the second server. So we actually included that backup server as another line item, another charge for a server, monthly charge. That was basically it. That was what formed the basis of the contract. And they came back to us and said, well, we've looked at the totals. We wanted the price to be more like this. And they likely just threw out a number. And it was like, well, okay, but I want it to be this, how are we going to negotiate this? They came armed with some data, and they said, we've spent this amount over the course of the last year after taking out anomalies, like they moved offices, and they sort of backed those numbers out, and they said, this is what we think we spend like per year without the special projects. We don't want to spend any more than that. Or they were kind of willing to like boost that by like 10%. They were okay with that because they knew they were getting more. They were getting more for it. They were getting the proactive support. They were getting the automatic maintenance and updates and things like that. They just know our rate is going up. I mean, that's a fact of life too. We've been working with them for like 4 years now. We have not raised our rate, so it's time. So they understood that, and they were willing to pay a little bit more, but not what we were asking. Going back to them in the negotiations, our first step was to say, well, you know what? We'll waive the charge for the second server. Got this offsite backup server that we're maintaining for you. We're responsible for it. We're making sure your backups are running and maintaining it. But okay, we won't charge you for that. So that knocked off like $100 a month off the bill. Okay, let's start there because I don't want to like mess with the prepaid hours. And they came back and they said, this is still too high and so on. And we kept negotiating. They talked us down to 3 hours per month. That was half of what we originally recommended. So once I took off that second Mac backup server, I wasn't going to put it back on. So now they had already kind of taken that right off the top, So they drove a pretty hard bargain. I was happy when they finally, agreed to sign. And it was with the understanding that this will cover like a basic bare minimum level of support. On our side, our thinking is that we'll still be able to maintain status quo with 3 hours per month because we have grunt work on there now, because some of the maintenance is being done automatically. We're concerned it's not going to cover any of the special projects that are pending, and we just made sure that they knew that they're not going to be surprised when they get a bill for whatever number of hours we go over for those months where we have a special project. Or we would negotiate those projects independently of this contract, come to some understanding and negotiation separately, and just bill on a project basis for that. So that was, those are the kind of two ways we can go forward with those. But yeah, that was a pretty tough negotiation. I was still happy to get them to sign on to it. I would not have gone any lower than that. And this does represent a slight increase over what they were paying before. So I think overall, we're not going to lose money on it. Yeah, that was just, an example of how this kind of thing goes. So don't be afraid to start high and leave room for negotiating down because it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's worth noting. If you knew you had room for that, then you could start at a higher level and not be worried about them saying, well, I'm walking away, instead of at least negotiating down a bit. It does sound like those people definitely drove a hard bargain, though, man.
For sure. Yeah, it was tough. It was a little stressful negotiating that, and trying to make them understand, they're getting more for it. It's our own fault because, as I had mentioned, plan for doing this was to raise the rates and then offer a significant discount on these contracts. So it's the rate overall still goes up even after the significant discount. That's where I ran into trouble because it didn't leave me a whole lot of room to bump up the number of hours and things like that because the rate was going up and they're also now paying separately for proactive support. We got down to where we are. And I think that the key is, I'm happy to collect the money on a monthly basis, even if we're going a little bit over here and there. I want them to be happy with the new arrangement as well. And as I mentioned, it goes up slightly versus where it was before. So even if it looks to me like, well, we're an hour over this month or something like that, we're still getting paid, similarly to what we were getting before. We're still getting more than we were getting before. I can't worry too much about a half hour here or an hour there, at least initially.
I come back to Luis's thought process too about the way he does things, which is more of a monthly fee as opposed to you're paying for a few hours. In some way, we're negotiating these hours and they're still getting time for, or specific amounts of time for those negotiated dollars. And it sounds like we're both doing the similar song and dance with our clients, which seems to be working. Don't get me wrong. But I got this one client that is more of a larger operation that I'm considering bringing into. I've been averaging out their hours over the last 2 years and seeing what they normally spend, including projects, and kind of coming to a thought process of maybe this is my first client where I'll present this monthly MSP model that's just, it is what it is. It's not for a certain amount of hours. It's not for this or that. It's just for us to manage you. And I think there's something refreshing about that model too, but I know a lot of our smaller clients couldn't handle that necessarily. In some ways, I feel like it is hybrid in that it's still not break fix, because we are being more proactive by making visits and stuff, but still an hourly model in some slight form.
I think that makes sense. Behind the scenes, you're saying like that you'd arrive at that total by calculating like the number of hours they spent on average times the hourly rate and plus, whatever fee for the proactive services. And you just present to them none of the math leading up to it, but just here's the number for all in support.
It kind of releases us as well from, man, did we go over this month or do we have to review that or whatever? And I'd like to have at least one client where we have that model in place where it's just like, we're getting monthly, we're doing right by them, of course, but we're getting just a monthly dollar amount for not 3 hours, not 6 hours, but just being there for them and being proactive in helping them. And I think there'd be something so refreshing and freeing about having a client like that.
I love the idea of not tracking the hours. I think that's a dream. That'd be awesome.
The bigger your team and you have that set overhead, like you were talking about earlier, Sam, about making the payroll, that's where a model like that works, because you just got to keep these guys or gals busy, during the course of the week. So if you have some contracts like that with potentially a little bit of fat in them and it's a slow day, you could just send them out and make a courtesy visit and just check systems at that particular given client. Anytime we're accounting for hours, there's almost an inherent implied obligation that we're going to make that appearance every month or every 4 or 5 weeks. But I think when you have a bigger contract like that, where they're just paying you a flat monthly rate, you might be on site, maybe a full day, over the course of the month, maybe a total of 24 hours during the last 5 weeks. And other clients, you may be a couple hours here, a couple hours there. Those contracts can be really lucrative when you're not accounting for every single hour.
Going through these different iterations of stuff and just learning from each process. And it's pretty interesting to just think about how I was 2 years ago versus now and how much things have changed already. And I do have to say a lot of it has to do with the show. Talking to people and learning from people has been a huge benefit for me.
Just great to be exposed to so many different business models, to hear how people are doing things, anything from all in, for a flat rate, to break fix and everything in between. And it's opening my mind to the idea like what you're describing, where you might have different plans fitting different people all at the same time. And that's okay too. I've always been reluctant to do that, but I think that it's okay if you get the impression that one client might be more responsive to just not having to worry about it. They don't care about what math goes into it. And you just present them the total, take it or leave it kind of thing. And then I guess it also makes it easier to negotiate. For me, my negotiations were stuck based on like multiples of an hour. I'm knocking off on the order of a couple $100 a month in each step of the negotiation, as opposed to saying, lowering it by $25 a month or $50 a month or something. It just leaves a lot more room if you have a flat rate and you just say, you throw out a number, and if they're not into that number, you just take a little bit off that number and see if they'll go for that, versus negotiating by knocking an hour off the monthly allotment.
I had a client that I had dealt with last year, almost going through the exact same scenario, where they had been a break fix client. They're not too far from our office here. There's not a lot of overhead. There's not a lot of work there. They've got 5 Macs and they've got a server. It's a little manufacturing company. And I wanted to retain them as a client, but at the same time, I wanted to make my life easier and put them in Watchman and grunt work. It all did work out in the wash. I definitely had to sharpen my pencil when it came down to the bottom line, because they're negotiating with you like somebody's going in and they're buying a car. Well, what if we don't get the leather interior? How about that? What's it going to cost us then? Kind of thing. And it worked out well. Basically go in there 2 hours per month. The estimate is we won't go over that, but if something blows up and we have to spend more time, they'll get the discounted hours what we've allocated for the next 12 months, but still it's business and it's work, keeps the lights on, the electric, pays the electric bill. And that's the biggest concern, is that you don't want these clients to walk. So you're very eager, you're not eager, but you will negotiate to make it work.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, in this case of this prolonged negotiation with this one client, I mean, we both kind of knew, like, we're not going to part ways over this. We'll figure it out. I was happy to finally make the agreement, even though it was half the number of hours per month, and I'm a little concerned that we're going to need more time to support them. The fact is that once they get on the paying every month, I'm happy to collect that money, and if we have to go a little bit over the amount of time we're spending to support them, it's okay. I mean, they're in this new model where we're still making money on the whole deal. If we have to charge them some of those months for some of those overages, they understand that too. So you're right. It's more important to get the contract. I mean, I think that's the goal here. On the other hand, guests we've had in the past, Jonathan Spiva, for example, 74bit.com, flat rate, $125 per user per month, $2,500 per month minimum. So that represents, I guess, 20 users and up for his clientele. And that's just all in, that's per user. It doesn't matter how many hours it takes. We talked about it at length with him on that show. And I think there's something that's so interesting about that, being able to just say, here's the price, and then, take it or leave it. I mean, that's even more powerful. Do you guys know what the clearest indicator is of a user that knows enough to be dangerous? What setting in system preferences turned on is just a clear indication that somebody has been poking around where they probably shouldn't be? Well, I didn't really mean for this to be a pop quiz. I had this observation the other day, and I thought, every time I see these settings turned on, I'm thinking printer sharing. Because you never need, like, there's no case where you really need printer sharing anymore. Do you guys see that fairly often? Like, people just have this, they think you need it, right? They're like trying to set things up themselves, and they're hunting around, and they turn on printer sharing, and they turn on internet sharing, and they think like, oh yeah, of course I want internet. They turn on internet sharing. It's like, those are the people where it's like, what else did you change here? I need to go and review this whole system now. I just thought that was a pretty clear indicator that somebody's been messing around where they probably shouldn't be.
It's generally lack of knowledge. They don't know how to get the printer driver to load on another machine, and it's a network printer, and they think like, well, I'll just share it out. And they bang around on it for a while, and that actually starts to work, where they're able to print through another machine, and they feel like they're successful. But you think that they're up to no good, huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I look at it and I think, this should not be, like, especially a network printer. That's always, that annoys me for some reason, like a pet peeve, when the printer shows up the correct way, being shared by itself on the network, and then it shows up being shared through another machine, being like reshared. And then if they set it up through the printer sharing, it only works when that machine is on, and the machine's a laptop, and it's, so yeah. Just one of those, you have to school the user, like, you don't need this. I know you think you need printer sharing on to, like, use your printer on the network, but that's not what it does. And you're explaining, like, why, what it does. And
what it would annoy you even more is if they texted you that they did,
right,
and they turned it on, and they texted that.
Right. The text is at 10:30 p.m. I can't print. I turned on printer sharing, and it still doesn't work. And it's like, you have to explain that through screenshots sent by iMessage. Yeah. Yeah. Super annoying. The other observation I had the other day was, Sam, you've talked about in the past where clients always point up when they talk about the cloud.
Right.
They look up and they point up and everything. I do that. I find myself doing the same exact thing these days. But I realize that they always ask the question. This is why people have a fundamental misunderstanding about the cloud. They ask the question as if it's an either or, right? Where are the files? Are they in the cloud, or are they on the machine? Right. It's like they're both. It blows their mind when you're like, it's in both places. They don't get that. Like Dropbox, they're like, well, I'll just put it in Dropbox. I'm running out of space here. And it's like, no, it's actually taking up space on your machine too. And that it blows their mind. They don't get that it's like in the cloud and on the local machine.
Yeah, that is pretty funny when that happens.
I met with a client today that was talking about iCloud. She had a Dropbox account that wasn't a paid Dropbox account, and it was maxed out. She was already at 127% above the 2.5 gigs that Dropbox gave her. And she said, well, I just bought some more iCloud storage, and I figured I'd use that. And I said, no. iCloud doesn't work like that. It's transparent. And, that even further confuses them. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, It's not like there's a box there like Dropbox where you could put stuff in the iCloud drive. It just doesn't work that way. It's a transparent layer, and if you use yada, 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 there's a lot of confusion out there still.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be hard to clear up. And I think, Apple's moving in the right direction with things like iCloud Photo Library, with the way they optimize local storage. That even happens on on a Mac, for example. Like, if you don't have enough space in your Mac, you can optimize the storage, have all your photos out there in the cloud, and have, smaller versions here taking up less space. I think that's kind of the direction that everything should move in, probably, for most users. I had a weird situation that reminded me of this recently, where I logged out of iCloud in troubleshooting my failure to log into iMessage. I thought, well, what's the third thing I would try if it was a client machine? Oh, I'd tell them to log out of iCloud and then log back in, and then, or restart and then log back in and then sign back into iMessage. Logged out of iCloud, and of course that turns off iCloud Photo Library, which I'm using on my MacBook Air. That was unsuccessful. I logged back into iCloud, and then final step, I went back to turn back on iCloud Photo Library, and it said, you do not have enough space to store your iCloud Photo Library on this machine. Do you want to optimize the storage? And I'm like, what is this going to do now? What's the end result? Because I already have everything synced. I know it's 100% synced. It just needs to check with iCloud and know that. Thinks it doesn't have enough space here because it's assuming it's going to have to download, another, terabyte, whatever it is, a few hundred gigs, let's say, of photos. So I'm actually waiting to see what's going to happen with that. And the other thing that I thought was really annoying in that situation, speaking of iCloud storage, is that it also said to me, you need to upgrade your iCloud storage in order to do this. Basically, for me to be able to turn on iCloud Photo Library, I had to upgrade my iCloud storage. Even though I've been using it, it's just fine, it's been working fine all along. I actually know that I don't need that much storage, but it looked to the Photos app like it did. And so it just needed to be turned on long enough to figure out that it actually doesn't need that much space. So that's another $5 I'm not getting back.
You can make it up in managed billing.
It's just like the airline. We came back from a trip, and you get so nickel and dimed with the bags and this and that and the add-ons. It's the ticket that you paid $167 for one way actually costs you $225 by the time you factor in all the extra charges.
Right. Yeah, it's frustrating, and you think, well, I can fight this, and then what? I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to go to Apple and explain the situation. It's going to take me longer to type this out in an email, to Apple to get this $5 back than it's worth.
I'll buy you a drink, Joe.
Thanks.
I put this in our text feed, and we'll put it in the show notes. Did you see the New Yorker cartoon where the mommy's walking back with the little boy, and she's got her arm around him, and she says, "Pop-pop's in the cloud now, sweetheart."
I saw that.
It's awesome. Yeah.
That's great. It's relevant to what we're talking about too. That's awesome.
Well, as we leave, I'll share one funny thing with you guys about the sharing pane since you brought it up, Joe. I had someone check the box for remote login in their sharing pane because they wanted to work from home. So they thought they could get into their Mac from their home using remote login. I didn't even bother explaining what that does because that's just way over their head.
Yeah, it's probably for the best. There's some weird legacy stuff there too, right? Like remote Apple events is in there. Oh yeah, I want to watch the keynote. I better turn this on.
May 4th and 5th down in Austin, Texas, the great get-together of technology professionals discussing how to run your business, managed service, and many other great presenters there. So check it out. We'll have some links in our show notes. We'd love to see you there.
For me, I spent a few hours, of course, troubleshooting it.
Sorry.
Somebody needs to go mop that up.
Was me. Totally my fault.
That sounded pretty bad.
Continue.
All right, here we go. So yeah, but whatever it was.